This is one of the best modern day affordable cinema cameras ever made. And I know that's a bold statement, but this is what happens when you mix together one of the most sophisticated sensors and you make the camera body it holds smaller. I've loved the Blackmagic Pyxis platform for a long time now, and they've ended up making the Ursa Cine 12K a lot more compact. Impressions are going to be everything, but I've liked the Pyxis platform for a while, so let's see what this can do. Today I'm going to talk about my first impressions putting this into the field. I think the Pyxis 12K is a gigantic upgrade from the Pyxis 6K, despite the fact that it only really has a changed sensor. But with that sensor that I have in my Ursa Cine 12K, putting in a compact body means so much more than what you think it does. We'll get there. Now, just so we're on the same page, Blackmagic sent me this camera. I'm probably going to say nice things about it, and whether I spent the $5,500 to buy it or I got it for free, I'm probably going to say exactly the same things. There's going to be things I really like about this camera. There's also going to be things I wish the camera had or things that it's missing. If me having the camera and having an ongoing relationship with Blackmagic is something that bothers you, then, well, there's nothing really that I can do to help you. However, if you want to stick around for the next 9 minutes and hear me talk about and show you some footage, well, then you're at the right place. We'll get there. Now, a lot of people might get turned off by the name of the Pyxis 12K and saying things like, I don't necessarily need to shoot in 12K. And on that note, I actually could kind of agree with you. The file sizes are going to be really big. It's going to be a bit clunkier on your hard drives. And obviously 12K is a little bit of overkill. However, one of the things that this sensor does really well is downsample in order to shoot at 8K, 4K, and even a Super 35 9K. And because of the sensor technology that Team 2 Films does a way better job of explaining, I'm still going to be able to get a lot of the color and the detail and maybe like a little bit of a drop off in dynamic range depending on where we go, but overall I'm going to get a great image downsampled all the way to 4K, so realistically I can use all 4 of those resolutions. Putting some of these images side by side, it would be hard pressed to know, especially only viewing this in 4K, which one of these guys is going to be at which resolution. One of the things I did notice though while shooting on the Pyxis 12K is that using the 12K mode and the 9K mode actually has a little bit more dynamic range than the 8K and the 4K. I typically shoot at the same gym pretty much every single time, and one of the challenges there is that I can't really get a lot of exposure out of the windows. Now, 95% of the time, it's actually not that important, but when shooting in the Pyxis in 12K and 9K Super 35, I noticed that I got a little bit more detail out of the windows versus shooting at the 8K and 4K. But also to say that every single one of these modes, the dynamic range is some of the highest in cameras. Now, there's a huge variety of different compression modes and resolutions, but the personal one that I use quite a bit is going to be the 8K 3x2 at 8:1. It's easy enough on my cards that I can get through a couple of projects without having to super worry about formatting every single time, but at the same time, it does downsample that 12K into 8K, and shooting in 3x2 helps out a lot because a lot of the clients I do work with, most of the time they're going to be shooting in 2 deliverables. One that's going to be 9x16, one that's going to be 16x9, and depending if they do ads on Facebook, there might be a 1x1 or a 4x5 as well. That's where OpenGate is going to come in handy. But if you want to see more about OpenGate 3x2 and its applications, you can just check out this video over here. Now, from a body and design perspective, the Ursa 12K and the Ursa 6K aren't very far apart from each other, and we'll do a full comparison video of these guys in a future video. But one of the things coming from the Ursa Cine 12K that I kind of guess you have to give up is going to be about half the readout speed and also half the frame rates. Now, the Pyxis 12K, for all that it has, doesn't necessarily have the exact same shooting modes as something like the Ursa Cine 12K. And that's going to be usually going to be in its higher frame rates, where the Pyxis 12K can only top out at about half of the frame rates at the Ursa Cine 12K, being 12K 40 frames a second, 72 frames a second at 8K if you're shooting in 3x2, but you can kind of window down on your aspect ratio in order to get some higher frame rates, which I'll put on the screen, one for each individual resolution. One thing that's also going to be impacted as well is going to be your rolling shutter or your shutter readout. Now, I am going to put on a chart on the screen so you can see each one, but generally speaking, it's going to be twice as slow as using the Ursa Cine 12K. However, when I shoot in the mode that I normally shoot in, which is at AK 3x2, having less than 12 milliseconds at AK 3x2 is an amazing result, especially out of this type of camera. Now, if you want to shoot at 12K because maybe you want the extra dynamic range or you're just a crazy person, you are going to have to deal with things up in the 20s. However, there's a ton of cameras that have 20 plus millisecond readouts, kind of like the Lumix S1R2 I'm shooting on right now, the Sony FX2. There's a bunch of them that have about 20 milliseconds in terms of readout speed. However, none of them are going to shoot at 12K. So if you already think 12K is overkill, those numbers for that rolling shutter almost doesn't really matter to you. Another fun kind of thing that I didn't actually notice on the Pyxis 6K, but it does it on the Pyxis 12K, and I'm sure it does it on the 6K as well, is that I also get a vertical menu as well. Now, I did take this camera out for a couple of different projects, and one of them included a music video shoot. And if you guys have worked in the music video space, because, well, I haven't, some of the things you have to do is sometimes get some vertical deliverables. When you turn the Pyxis 12K to the side, it actually has a vertical menu, which makes it easier to get dedicated vertical content. Now, you're probably going to say, why don't you shoot in 3x2? Well, that's because I knew these are going to be vertical, so I didn't necessarily have to, but in other situations where you might have to change things around, you shoot in 3x2. So there's that. Also, because we've mentioned 3x2 open gate at least like 5 times in this video, you are still going to get anamorphic support in this guy, which works pretty well because right now on my Pyxis 12K, I do have the Blazar Remus lenses on here. There's a set of lenses I own. I bought them last year, but I actually haven't really shot a lot of anamorphic in doing a lot of these videos. I shot a lot on the Typox Americes. I shot a couple of projects on the Nisi Aureus lenses, as well as I also used my Digital Vespa 2s for a collab video that we'll talk about a little bit later. But just like the Pyxis 6K, just like the Lumix cameras, just like the Ursa Cine 12K, you do have full anamorphic support. But one thing that you don't have on the Pyxis 12K is, well, IBIS. And I just did a slew of videos on the Canon C50, and that was a point of contention for a lot of people. But one thing I'll say is, one, most cinema cameras don't have IBIS anyways outside of the Sony Burano. But two, one thing you can do on some of the new Blackmagic cameras is that the camera itself stores its gyro data. That way, when you go into DaVinci Resolve, because you do get it for free when you buy this camera, you're able to use a gyro stabilization, which actually smooths out footage pretty decently. We went to a couple of different locations in Toronto to actually shoot a bit of a social project for Under Armour, and one of the things I did notice while shooting on the Pyxis 12K in my Typox lenses was you kind of got a little bit of those micro jitters when I'm swaying the camera running around, and I didn't really have a plan in some of the handheld shots. However, using gyro data in DaVinci Resolve took me like 2 seconds to do it, and it actually stabilizes that footage, so it actually looks like I know what I'm doing. This is something that you can use if you're a handheld shooter, because I shoot a lot of stuff in handheld. This is pretty much the rig that I'll end up using. Some sort of top handle, a little bit of weight to the rig, and a battery at the back. And sometimes, depending on what you're doing, depending if you're walking around or what your caffeine intake is, you might have a bit of shaky hands. And this is something you can do in post in order to fix that. Now, hopefully this doesn't need a section for image quality because, well, one, I've already talked about Blackmagic image quality. It's absolutely amazing. But one of the things I like the most about it is how it treats skin tones. I'm a dark-skinned person. I work with other dark-skinned people. I also work with people with fairer skin. But I find with the Blackmagic cameras is every single time I use them, the skin looks nice and pleasing. The colors don't look necessarily off. There's not blotchy patches in the skins with like reds and purples and stuff like that, no matter which skin tone you're going to be using. And as long as you have your lighting dialed in, things are going to look great. This is something that I've pretty much said in every single Blackmagic camera since the full-frame 6K, and it's no different on the Pyxis 12K. And if it was, that would kind of be actually concerning. Overall, if you're somebody like me who works with a lot of people's faces, which also sounds kind of weird, the Pyxis 12K is going to look great. It's going to have all the resolution. It does have an incredibly nice highlight roll-off, which actually is becoming a term that's more and more frequent, but incredibly hard to quantify. But basically, no matter what skin tone you're using, if your lighting's dialed in, people don't look like plastic dolls, which is really nice. Now, something that's missing on the Pyxis 12K and maybe missing on the Ursa Cine 12K, I never really paid attention whether or not it was there, is going to be that it only has one base ISO at 800. Now, for a lot of people, you're probably going to shoot at 800 anyways, and you can always increase your ISO if you ever need it. However, this is one of the few cameras where I can't really find information on a dual base ISO, which means that for the majority of things, I'm going to just leave it at that 800 most of the time. Now, keeping that in mind, some of the other cinema cameras pretty much operate at 800 ISO anyways. Having a dual base and having a second gain circuit that'll reduce noise in low light situations is super, super nice. But also, when you have as much dynamic range as the Pyxis 12K, which, and if I remember correctly, it's only really surpassed by RE cameras, you're probably going to have a lot of information, and as well as the whole program that does the denoising for you, It comes free when you buy this camera. So if you have any problems with it, well, you can just use the denoiser in there. Now, what I'm also going to do is I'm actually going to cut to Uncle Kofi because he's going to talk about low lights, because I've not seen him in a while, but he has to go to Ghana in like maybe two months, maybe 6 weeks. So I want to go the Ghanaian language of the day, but also I want to say the low lights in this camera. So we're going to talk to my uncle. So the Ghanaian language of the day is going to be kakra, which would mean little or small. Sometimes you're making progress, you say kakra. For example, my nephew is going to Ghana in maybe 5 or 6 weeks, and he has to learn history. He's not very good though. He has not been practicing. So he will say, Mr. Tree kakra kakra. That means that little by little, he's going to make very small progress. And as you are making progress from 800 ISO to 1600 ISO to 3200 ISO, you're going to notice a little bit of noise. Yeah, noise kakra. So it's not going to be very big, but you'll notice small little jumps. But what you can do if you're going to go up to maybe 3200 ISO, you can use something called noise reduction in your DaVinci Resolve, and that will help solve your problems. However, you have to keep in mind that you cannot use this all the time. You cannot go to 12,800 ISO like the FX3 and go and do foolishness like this. So you have to make sure that when you have noise kakra, you have to just make sure you use 3200 between 800, and then you'll fix your problems. Okay, so one of the things I've seen on a couple of forums in some of the Facebook groups is going to be the banding issue coming out of the Pyxis 12K, especially in the skies. Now, if you look really closely onto this image right over here, you're going to notice some lines that are just a little bit off colored. But I think I might have found a fix in this, because when I export footage, I don't really have this banding issue. I only really see it when I'm doing things in post. One thing you can do if you want to see things a little bit better is you could actually go over to the gear icon down here, go to your color management, and instead of using trilinear as your 3D lookup table interpolation, change it from trilinear to tetrahedral. Now, I want you to remember what the image looked like before I turned on this option, but once I click save, that banding actually goes away for the most part. Now, one thing that I wanted to do here is go through each of the compression modes, go through each of the resolutions in order for us to find out if there's going to be a gigantic difference going from 12K all the way down to 4K. One thing I might say here is that as you put more and more compression onto your image and as you go lower and lower resolution, what's going to end up happening is you might see a little bit of banding. However, once I switch things over to tetrahedral, I don't really see it that much, and it doesn't really show up on exports, especially when you're looking at it on YouTube. This might help or this might hurt, and in more extreme situations, you might notice it a little bit more. However, I will say less compression between the resolutions is going to help that a little bit. Or if you someone that uses LUTs and color space transforms and you're mixing and matching colors around, using something like changing the interpolation settings of your actual color management might help a little bit in getting a better image, or at least something that makes you feel a bit more confident in what you are doing before you end up pressing export. Now, some people's results are going to vary, and some people aren't having any banding issues at all. And in my particular situation, while I'm exporting these videos, I don't really notice it that much. I only seem to notice it when I'm in the color tab in DaVinci Resolve, although changing a mode setting takes a couple of seconds. So that's actually probably a pretty decent fix if you want to get rid of some things. Now I'm going to tell you up front, this guy is probably going to be one of my favorite cinema cameras. For not 1 second have I been using the Pyxis 6K, the Ursa Cine 12K, or the Pyxis 12K, and missed my red Komodo X that I sold almost 2 years ago, where everyone got really, really mad. But one thing I will say is there's a couple of quirks that you need to be aware of, especially if you're interested in seriously buying this camera. For one, you need to realize that even when you're shooting in 4K, you're still downsampling a 12K sensor down to 4K, or you're shooting in 12K natively. But anywhere in between those things, this thing's gonna run your batteries. You're probably going to need a lot of batteries. I tried using the Sony FX6 BPU 35, and it literally lasted 35 minutes. And then I tried to use something that had a higher wattage, but for the most part, if you're gonna use one of these guys, and I picked this one up on Amazon, I don't really know what the brand name is, but these are BPU 100s, and it lasted an hour. I got an hour out of one of these guys, and I only have 2 of these. So realistically, on a day, I'm either gonna have to buy more of these BPU batteries or be really okay with only having 2.5 hours on 3 batteries. The Pyxis 12K is a pretty hungry camera, but you could also get things like V-mount batteries in order to help you while rigging this guy up. However, the rig that I have, which I maybe will talk about in just a second, it's not really conducive to having any other batteries but these. So just either keep a charger on you or buy more batteries, realistically. Another thing you're going to want to consider is also going to be having extra memory cards. Again, this Pyxis 12K is going to downsample into 4K, and even at some of the lower compression ratios, depending on your resolution, some of the files are still going to be pretty big. Now, I talked about this in a previous video when talking about the Usability 12K and some of the cards that I use, but I use anything between these little Pro grade 2TB cards or my Angelbird versions as well. The version 1 of the Angelbirds I have at about 1785 megabytes per second, or whatever that read-write speed is. Basically, it works with all the shooting modes that I use on the Pyxis 12K, although I should probably do a more in-depth video on the cards. But generally speaking, if you have 2TB Angelbird cards, the CF Express Type Bs, this one, which you probably see it on the screen, you're probably going to be fine. You could also go to Blackmagic's website and you could actually type in the compression, the resolution, everything that you want in order to find out what the speeds you do need and then just match them up to your card. But make sure they're sustained speeds. Now, on that same Angelbird card, it does transfer at 1785 megabytes per second. I think that's also going to be its upload speed as well, but I was able to get almost half a card in about 10 to 12 minutes. So if you want to double that for a 1TB card, you're looking at about 25 minutes. I'd say maybe up as far as half an hour for a 1TB card, transferring it into a Samsung SSD drive. I'm using the T9 4TB. So if that helps anything, then that's going to give you some idea of some speeds. The body for the Pyxis 12K is pretty much the same as a Pyxis 6K. Now, me personally, I got the L mount version because I find the L mount to be more versatile. If I want to adapt it to EF, I could obviously do that. And also, I do have this PL adapter here. This is the Mofosh Poco, and it does have the little ND in here. So that way I could change my exposure, I could control my exposure, while at the same time, I could use PL lenses on the L mount. Now, one thing that I'm actually going to try doing a little bit in this little basic rig that I have is actually using the DJI Focus Pro motor, because I could use a hand unit in order to pull focus, which is something that I did on a commercial job just a couple of days ago, because I did use the Pyxis as my slider camera because it's a lot smaller than the Ursa Cine 12K and it wouldn't have fit on the iFootage slider. So it actually comes in handy to be able to have a portable system in order to pull focus, especially for things like using it for a slider shot. Another thing you might want to be aware of is the fan on the Pyxis 12K is pretty loud. Now, if you're in a completely quiet room and also using that free software, you can eliminate that stuff in post. But because it's pumping out so much resolution, so much information at a really fast rate, mind you, the fan's going to be a little bit louder on the Pyxis 12K versus something than the Pyxis 6K. It's also pretty loud on the Ursa 12K as well, but in those situations, you usually have a microphone that's just not in the same direction as the fan. However, you are probably going to be able to hear it. Now, there's a couple of things that I feel like the Pyxis 12K should have, could have, and just doesn't. For one, just let me hold a ProRes. Let me just hold a ProRes codec, like a ProRes 422, like a ProRes, even a ProRes 422 HQ. Let me just hold some form of ProRes, or if I need to do quick deliverables or someone doesn't have Blackmagic RAW, I'm going to be able to deliver in that format. Also, it could save a little bit on file sizes. Referencing a couple of jobs I worked on before, I do have to send a lot of footage away. I'm not the editor for some of these projects. So when you see footage on this channel and sometimes you don't see the final edit, it's because it's pushed to an editor that just isn't finished the project yet. But also, way that I negotiate rates and maneuvering around certain things is I have footage that I could show you guys on this channel, but that's a completely different story for a different time. That all to be aside though, if I am delivering this footage to somebody else, ProRes is a pretty generally accepted format in terms of file footage, so being able to have that would be super helpful. But what I do think might happen is because it's processing so much information from a 12K RAW all the way to an H.265, it might require a lot of processing capacity to do that, which is probably why it's not on the camera. Now, some of you guys might be asking what I'm going to do with the Pyxis 12K, because I also own and operate on the Ursa Cine 12K. And one of the things I'm going to say is I don't choose, I collect. No, seriously. One thing I wanted to try to do was build out a production kit because, believe it or not, I still take on a couple of clients on this channel. It's just really nice because they let me use some of the footage for these videos. But what I wanted to do is for things like sticks and easy rig and dolly sliders and some of like the bigger rigs, that's going to be the Ursa Cine 12K. And when I'm not using it and I want to make a little bit of money, I'll consign it to a rental shop and I'll make some money passively. However, if I want to shoot on handheld, I want to shoot on a gimbal, or I want to shoot on a slider, I'm probably just going to use one of these guys. It's small enough, it's compact enough, and most of the gimbals and the other kind of smaller grip and gear that I have can suit the Pyxis 12K because I already did it on the Pyxis 6K. This is going to be a 1-2 punch for my workflow, and oftentimes if I have something that's a run and gun gig, I'll just pack the Pyxis 12K with me. But if it's something where I have a corporate client or something where there's interviews where I need XLR ports, I'm just going to use the Ursa Cine 12K as well. Because believe it or not, the price of both of these still might be around the same price as buying one Fuji Eterna 55 or that new Raptor that came out. Now, I think before we wrap this video up, I'm going to talk about a little bit of the future of this channel. Now, unsurprisingly, this channel is a lot about cameras and camera technology and using on a variety of different situations and then giving that information back to you because I have access to stuff that you guys might not have. So it's kind of nice that you get to watch and see some of these things without having to spend your own money. That being said, I feel like lately there's been kind of two categories of things I've talked about. There's cameras that are kind of in service to the audience and things that I think the audience is interested in, like the Canon C50, that doesn't necessarily fit in my workflow, but I still want to give it a shot and put it through its paces. And then there's also going to be cameras that are for my own personal interest that I'm also going to do the same thing and put it through its paces, but they're going to be things that are a little bit more my speed. And the Pyxis 12K I think fits in that category. Sometimes I'll have access to stuff that is going to be for you guys, and sometimes I have access to stuff that's going to be for me. That also to be said, the Nikon ZR I pick up at the time of you watching this video. That being said, that is pretty much my first impressions for the Pyxis 12K. It improves on the Pyxis 6K. It's a really good B camera to the Ursa 12K, or at the very least, it makes you feel a lot better that you didn't want to spend the money to get that gigantic camera.